Hi, my name is Josh Hall, and here's my case dilemma. Solid Rock is a 50-year-old Christian youth choir ministry made up of high school and college-age students that started at a large multi-generational church in California in the 1970s. In the early years, the ministry was very popular and very effective among young people, especially reaching out to unchurched young people, engaging them in worship and Christian community. Solid Rock was led by a 62-year-old volunteer named Jim, who was a part of the church and the youth choir program in its heyday in the 1980s. After graduating from the program, Jim continued as the volunteer choir director. Jim was very passionate about the program, choral music, and engaging young people in worship. Solid Rock takes hundreds of hours of rehearsals and performances, and the season builds each year towards a spring break tour. This tour ends with a homecoming concert that attracts many people from the local community and alumni from the program who travel back to the host church to be a part of the final stop of their tour each year. For the first 25 years of the ministry, the Solid Rock thrived. Each year, 150 to 200 young people will be involved, many of whom did not attend church. Gradually, the program began to struggle and suffer losses in financial support, growing costs, and a declining interest among young people in choir. During season 35, there was a tragic van accident involving some of the volunteers who were transporting musical equipment for the choir. A tire blew out on the church-owned van, and sadly, 3 people died as a result of the vehicle losing control on the freeway and crashing into a median. In response, most of the staff and volunteers quit the program, and there was even a lawsuit filed against the church. These factors led the church leadership at the time to conclude that this would be the end of the Solid Rock Youth Choir ministry. Following that season, Jim decided that this tragedy, would be a total loss if the program was ended also. Despite significant pushback, Jim managed to rally a small group of volunteers and resurrect the youth choir program, claiming full responsibility from wherever might happen in the future. For the next 10 years, Jim spent hours and hours leading and overseeing and fundraising in order to maintain the struggling program for around 50 kids. Several years later, the church was beginning to move in a new direction. They built a new building dedicated to kids and youth ministry and reaching more kids, students, and young families for Jesus. They began to experience new life and were growing both numerically and younger all the time. Church began to hire new staff, including a new high school pastor, Jamie, who did not share the vision or passion for the youth choir and began to focus more on contemporary youth ministry approaches. Jamie's response was, "The choir used to work, but kids today are not into choirs, choral music, or singing in groups. We have to find better ways to reach them." This attitude was obviously not popular with Jim and the other youth choir volunteers. After evaluating the growing lack of effectiveness of the program, the ballooning financial cost of $75,000 to $100,000 per year for the choir tour, and in light of the new vision of the church, the leadership eventually decided to phase out the Solid Rock Youth Choir. Jim had also informed church leadership that he would be stepping down, and the church decided to phase out the program at the end of its 50th year. At first, Jim was on board with this plan, especially since he was retiring. Later, he changed his mind and began to undermine the church's efforts to move on from the program. Jim began an underground email campaign to, quote, save the Solid Rock, and he appealed to alumni, church members, and choir supporters. In response, the church hosted a town hall meeting. Most in attendance had been participants in the program, and the meeting devolved quickly into a very negative experience that did not produce the desired results. Jim spoke in the meeting and said, "If this church cannot see the value of reaching kids through music, then I will be taking this program to another church that can see more clearly." Jim and his family left the church that he had been a part of since he was a child, as did several of the families who had been supporters of the youth choir program. Ultimately, the program ended much more painfully than the church had intended because of this disagreement. Although the church moved on and started other youth outreach programs, several people were hurt by Jim and the choir supporters. Many in the church regretted that previous leadership had allowed Jim to resurrect the ministry after the tragic accident and allowed him to lead what ultimately became a very unhealthy ministry that ended badly.